Second performance on this stage, the king of comedy, Dave Arieti.
Okay. So I go to this here fish restaurant and I look at the menu. What do I see? I see halibut. I see flounder. I see lobster. Now I don't want that. Not kosher. Rainbow trout. Okay. Rainbow trout. Well, maybe. Then what do I see in the menu? I see catch of the day. So what do? I ask the waitress. I say, Miss, what's the catch of the day? She says, today it's a case of hepatitis. So she says, I said, well, you know, I don't think I want that. I'll take the rainbow trout. That seems a little better. She says, okay. Then she says, do you want a salad? I said, sure. Then she says, what kind of dressing do you want? I said, well, what are the choices? She says, well, we have a Russian dressing, a French dressing, a Thousand Island dressing, and an Italian dressing. I say, what the hell? I'll take a Russian dressing. So she comes 5 minutes later with the salad, and I say, where's the dressing? She says, hold on, man, I'll get it to you. So she reaches into her pocket, and she pulls out a picture of Vladimir Putin putting on his pants. So then I say, by the way, do you have any wine? She says, sure. And I say, by the way, give me the cheapest wine you got. After all, my name is not Bill Gates. So I said, what is your cheapest wine? She says, well, it's the house wine. I said, okay, I'll take that. So she brings it, and I take a sip, and I say, you know, I bet you that wine's from California. And she says, you're right. How do you know? I say, it's simple. You can taste the air pollution. So anyway, I leave the place, you know, and I'm walking along, and what do I see? Well, I see a guy walking down the street. He has socks coming out of his ears. He has his shirt where his pants should be. He has his pants where his shirt should be. And he comes over to me and he says, mister, can you spare me a quarter? And I said, sure. And then I asked him, I said, by the way, who picks your suits for you? Quasimodo or the local bag lady? So needless to say, I don't think I endeared myself with him. And I told him, I said, listen, why don't you get a job? He says, I would, but I don't work any week with a Tuesday in it. So, okay, so I told him, hey, Joe, okay. So I told him, I says, you know, I don't think there are too many of them left. You have a problem. Okay, so what do? I begin to walk and I say to myself, I said, you know, when you work, you got to deal with all these problems. You know, maybe this guy has a point. You got to deal with taxes and Social Security. And boy, I got to tell you, once I had a very severe Social Security problem. It went like this. I tell you, it was terrible. I tried to get social with this here girl, and she called the security out. I'm telling you. You know, so, okay. So anyway, I'm walking along, and I see this girl standing here doing this, you know. I go over to her, and I say, hey, what's your name, lady? She says, plug off. And I said, whoa, Russian, eh? So anyway, I decided, well, what the hell, I better get home before I get in any more trouble. So, you know, I'm going home, and it's kind of dark, and I pass one of the forest preserves. You know, in this area, there are many, and all of a sudden I hear a humming. And I say, man, what's that noise? I look out the window, and I see a flying saucer come, getting to land in front of me. I say, well, this has got to be interesting. Let me see what's going on here. You know, I like flying saucers and all this, you know. So I take a look and I see these two Martians come out. You know, each one looked like a cross between George Bush and a bowl of matzo ball soup. So I take my finger and I pinch one in the belly and he goes, wah. And so then he asked me, instead of saying, hey, take me to your leader, he says, what's your name? And I say, why, my name is David Arieti. What's your name? And he says, my name is Hukaka. I say, okay, what's your friend's name? Well, his name is Kukadura Chokolatskakagazunsta. And I say, you know, that's funny. And the Martian says, what's funny? I say, your friend there, he doesn't look Jewish. So anyway, I decided to go home. And you know, it's the forest preserve. They got a lot of animals. So I'm driving home, and what do I see? I see a couple of deer hanging around. I say, well, that's pretty cool. So I go home, and I tell my wife, I say, you know, Maggie, I say, I just saw a couple of deer in the forest preserve there. She says, well, listen, Dave, did you hear what happened on the news? They found a lot of deer in a building in Chicago. I said, what building was it? She said, the post office. Post office, yeah, Dear John, Dear Mary, Dear Okay, now, see this tie? You know what country I got it in? Thailand.